Vinny.
Hey, Katie.
Welcome to Learn Real Good.
A science comedy podcast for you.
That wasn't quite it.
No.
That wasn't quite it.
That's another way to
You know
open
what?
it.
You know, we're throwing the old shackles of patterns out the front door.
Why do we
It's
need...
a new year. It's a new season. Well, it's not so new anymore. We're about through the middle. But you know what?
We
No
keep
rules.
changing it.
No
No rules. Yeah.
We're not even going to do banter.
What? No, we need to do banter.
No, we're definitely bantering.
We need to banter.
I do. What's new with you, Vinny? I have a banter topic.
Yeah. What's the banter topic? What? You have the banter topic, and then you're just like, I'm going to throw it out.
I was
what's new with you?
the floor.
Uh-huh.
Which I never do.
No.
But remember, new rules.
New rules.
New season, new rules.
New rules, no rules.
Whoa.
New rules, no rules.
Need that t-shirt. We Degrassi. We've been watching a lot of Degrassi.
It's true.
Junior high.
Junior high. We started at the beginning.
Original.
Well, we didn't start at the beginning
No.
of Degrassi Street.
The whole story is we were on a road trip a
Yes.
few weeks ago, and we put on the TV because TV in a hotel is one of life's greatest pleasures.
It's pretty great.
And right off the bat, Degrassi Junior High, which is the first time we've ever discussed it as being a formative show for us.
We both watched it as kids, for sure.
And it was a delight to experience together. And now we've started rewatching from the beginning, and it has been a joy for me.
It's both enlightening and entertaining.
And very dark. There's a lot of stuff.
There's no good things that happen to those kids.
There is some, but it's a lot of tough stuff.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to address like societal issues, like all of them. And so every episode is like, this week in tragedy.
But we're sort of watching with one of your teens as well, and sort of explain to them that for us, there was no internet, so there's no way to learn about the tough lives.
And nor were we taught this in school.
No one talked about these things.
No.
No one talked about these things. But this is not a Degrassi podcast, although you know what?
It should be. That should be a spin-off.
We should talk about that after.
Yeah.
This is a science comedy podcast.
Correct.
Where we shoot the breeze.
Done. Check.
And then we share science facts, and then we're gonna have a guest, which I'm
so
very excited about.
Yeah,
our guest.
I'm really pumped.
We
always get great guests. Never a stinker.
It's true.
One day we're gonna have a stinker.
Don't say that.
And
that episode will never come out.
We'll never air it.
The fact that you're hearing this means
this wasn't a stinker.
Fresh.
Yeah.
Certified non-stinker. Guaranteed non-stink. Well, with that, should we get to our facts?
I would love to.
Science facts.
Facts.
Who goes first? Who's on first?
Do you want to go first?
All right. I planned how I would begin this.
Did it start with that?
No. That was a terrible beginning. Vinny.
Yes, Katie.
What do flying squirrels, platypi, wasps, and frogs have in common?
Flying squirrels,
yes.
Platypi, wasps,
yes,
and what was the fourth thing?
Frogs.
This is a wide category.
Yeah.
Things I don't want to eat.
That's correct. We're talking about animals Vinny won't eat today.
Yeah, that's a science fact.
Well, it's a fact for me. Things do not serve you for dinner.
Correct.
No, bioluminescence. They all have recently been discovered to have bioluminescence.
Frogs?
Yes.
Wasps?
Some wasps. Platypi.
And flying squirrels.
And some squirrels, yes.
Some squirrels or some flying squirrels?
Some flying squirrels, yes.
Specifically the glowing ones. Tell me more.
Okay, so this fact comes from frogs specifically.
You got this from a frog.
Yes, a frog reported this to me on my way to work.
All right.
It's like, lady,
wow.
hot news.
I feel like you're burying the lead here, but continue.
No. It's about the information, not the fact that I talked to frogs today. So we actually discovered that some frog species have bioluminescence in 2017, which was huge news.
Yeah.
Because before then, we usually think of, ocean creatures, plants, not a lot of animals that bioluminesce, particularly on terrestrial systems. But since then, we've discovered that it's way more common than we thought. So this comes from a study that looked at 150 different species of frog and found blank percentage of them were bioluminescent. What would you guess? Of 151 species, how many?
120%. More than the number surveyed.
No.
Oh, that was a bad guess then.
No, it was a great guess.
5%.
All of them.
Get out.
All of the ones that they surveyed in South America. That doesn't mean all frogs bioluminescent.
Only the South American ones.
There's way more than 150 species of frogs.
Sure.
150. They looked at 150 frogs
and
in South
100%
America.
of them.
100% of them had some bioluminescence.
Were they like really like at a rave? Or what was happening?
Well, that's the question. So what is it for? So first, what colors do they fluoresce? Because that'll help tell us a bit more of the story.
I need to know.
They largely had green fluorescence and orange fluorescence.
Oh.
And where the fluorescence occurred is sort of indicative as to what the purpose is. So it was on their arms and in their sort of croaking area, which led scientists to believe it probably has something to do with mating. I mean, not a tough guess, right? We already know they're singing for mates, but also if you have this thing that's enlarging as you croak, that's bioluminescing, that also provides a visual
very eye-catching
stimulant.
And they're very famous for gesturing, so their arms.
They're doing this.
Are you sure this wasn't done in Italy?
So they think the green luminescent stuff is for themselves, for their own species.
Okay.
And that's based on the fact that their eyes are very sensitive to green fluorescence at twilight, which is when they are mating.
Okay.
But what about the orange bioluminescence? Yes.
Poisonous.
Their guess is that it's for warning to predators instead of, so they're not necessarily orange colored, but they're fluorescing orange. And that's supposed to, so they think it might have something to do
So
with
this
predators.
is a recent discovery. So I'm imagining the fluorescence is rather faint.
I will show you a picture. And if
This
I remember,
is going to be great for a podcast.
maybe I'll remember to post this picture. So
That's
it's
a
not that
glowing
faint.
frog. Yeah, no.
It's not that faint. But the thing is, you only see it when you put a blue light on them.
Oh.
And I mean, if you're walking around the forest, you're not at a rave. You're not flashing
blue light around. No.
Oh my God, the frogs. That's how they found it, though.
That's
It
cool.
was a good thing they were raving in the forest.
And
Fake
so
news.
platypi and like a whole bunch of things.
So this article's about frogs. So they mentioned
these other
yes,
ones.
and so that was just my way of getting to the conversation. But I don't have a lot of information as to where platypi
bioluminescence
are
is pretty cool. Let's be honest.
Super cool. I mean, what do you think of when you hear like luminescence in an animal? What's your go-to?
Firefly.
Firefly.
Yeah, they're the coolest.
They're amazing. I'd never seen one until like 5 years ago. When I saw one, I was like, oh, those aren't fake. I just had never
It's like
seen them.
like unicorns or leprechauns. It's like, oh yeah, fireflies. They're
Step
weird.
down from leprechaun, the firefly.
Yeah.
But we've been
they're
seeing them a
real.
lot in
Yes,
Montreal,
it's true.
which I don't remember. I've been here for
No, it's true.
13 years. Only this past summer day, I see them a lot. We saw them
It's
a lot.
almost as if the climate has changed to make it habitable for them.
Well, save that for my next fact.
All right. That's really cool. Bioluminescence is cool.
Cool. I always think of the anglerfish. That's my go-to for luminescence.
Wow, deep cut.
Yeah, deep
Literally
sea cut.
deep sea cut.
Deep sea cut.
Very
All right.
cool fact.
Oh, thank you, Vinny. I want to hear yours, though. Yeah.
Well, my fact is a little bit of science news that happened. Now,
that is the name of the assignment.
Yeah. So, are you familiar with Voyager, the satellites, the Voyagers 1 and 2?
A little. You know, I'm mostly into the life sciences.
Yeah, you're mostly animal based.
I think I've heard of Voyager.
Right. So
Star Trek, right?
In the 70s, they realized that there was going to be an alignment of planets that is very conducive. If you launched a satellite, it would hit all of them, like the gravity alignment of them. You didn't need to add extra fuel. You just launch it once from Earth, and gravity would automatically take it to the 4 outer planets.
Cool.
Because they were all in a row. So they sent 2 probes.
Yeah.
Voyagers 1 and 2. They launched like mid and late 70s. And they are currently the furthest things from Earth.
Wow.
They have left the solar system, and we can still get signals from them. They're still operating. So they have like radioactive, like nuclear engines, tiny little heaters that generates electricity, and they're still broadcasting their data. Like there's still a couple instruments that basically all the instruments ostensibly work, but the power source is fading over time. So they don't have enough energy to use them all at the same time. So they've been shutting them off one by one and just getting like the minimum amount of information that they can while running the minimum amount of power. And so we actually can communicate with both of them to this very day. They're like super, super far. Wow. Now, here's the interesting part.
Okay.
Recently, NASA sent the command to Voyager 2, just like a routine command to like, adjust its navigation and orientation because it's very far away. So the precision on their antenna has to be exact for us to receive information.
Okay.
Now, there was a small mistake.
Oh, no.
And it reoriented itself 2 degrees off of Earth.
Classic Voyager.
And so they lost contact with Voyager.
Oh, no.
This thing that they've been in contact with since the late 70s.
Someone's getting fired.
Well, here's the thing. They were like, oh, no, can we recover from this? And NASA being, some pretty smart people.
Yeah,
some smart people.
There, yeah, for sure.
One of the things that they didn't panic too much about was that it's going to automatically goes through a system where it reorients itself to Earth every X number of weeks. And so on October 15th, it was going to point back to Earth anyways. So like, okay, this is bad, but we're going to lose all this data between like, the end of summer to October. That's a big gap in our data. We'd really love to get this back. So what they did was they normally send a signal of 20 kilowatts, which is a power magnet measurement of how strong the signal has to be to reach Voyager. Okay, so now because it's off by 2 degrees, that signal is going to be incredibly faint. Like, so it's kind of slightly pointed towards the Earth, so it would pick up some of it, but the Voyager spaceship is not going to read that signal. It's too quiet. Because it's not like, I'm not talking right at you. I'm talking like off at an angle.
Yeah.
So what did NASA do? They got the biggest transmitter they have, and they got it to broadcast at 400 kilowatts. So 20 times the strength of what it would normally send. And 400 kilowatts, when that thing transmits, airplanes aren't allowed to fly over it because it will fry the electronics on that plane and probably be bad for everybody on board. So when they did it, they got the biggest, and I think it's in Australia, and they did what is called a shout, a telescope shout, or transmission shout. And they sent the corrected orientation, and then a couple days later, they got information back from Voyager 2. It had picked up the strong signal and reoriented itself. And so now we're back in business, baby.
How are the people on Voyager doing?
There's no people on it, so I guess okay. That was a joke. That was a joke. I know you didn't think there were people on it. I know you didn't.
But that's pretty incredible that, we have to change our computers like every 2 weeks at work because they get outdated.
Right?
That somehow we're still able to communicate with these things.
This thing that is so far away. I believe it's 18 hours or 17 hours round to communicate one way.
Oh.
At the speed of light. So that's how long it takes a message to reach Voyager. And then for it to return information, it's another 17, 18 hours.
Imagine the frustration if they leave you on red.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, you got to wait 17 hours?
Yeah, this is a pain.
What a pain. Very cool.
Yeah, so there you go. We're still in contact with Voyager, both of them.
How far is it going to go? Here's the question.
Yes.
So this was planned in the 70s.
Yes.
And they want this to go, are they hoping it goes past Pluto?
It's well past Pluto.
Does Voyager know that Pluto's not a planet anymore?
Yes.
Because when it was sent, we did consider Pluto a
correct,
planet.
Yeah.
That's a big change for them.
I mean, on one of them, there's like a gold plate that has a picture of our solar system. It probably does have Pluto on it.
That's embarrassing.
So we're going to have to issue errata for it. Like, we're going to have to send another satellite in the same direction. Be like, a news update, like a release note.
Yes.
Yeah. Software patch.
That's the only issue, I'm sure.
That's the main issue,
the Pluto issue.
The aliens will be like, you said this was a planet.
Do you remember the news, like hearing the news that Pluto's not a planet anymore?
Yeah.
Like, that was very earth-shattering for me.
I thought it was
what
great.
What is real?
I was always on board with that.
Oh, you were team Pluto's not a planet?
Pluto not a planet.
Was that a thing that was happening years before Pluto was outed?
In the astronomy community, it was a big debate.
Oh, fascinating.
Here you go.
Very cool. Very cool science fact, Vinny.
Thank
you for bringing that to our attention.
And thank you for your science fact, Katie.
You're welcome. Look at us with the politeness.
Look at us.
New patterns.
No rules. More politeness.
Well, that's enough out of us talking to each other.
Great.
We shouldn't be left alone.
We need more people in here.
Guest.
Yes.
And it's my honor to introduce our guest this week, Georgia Loewen. Georgia is a master's student at Carleton University and has a biosystems engineering degree from the University of Manitoba. Her research at Carleton focuses on exploring video game accessibility for players with upper limb motor disabilities through wearable technology. Aside from accessibility research, Georgia enjoys baking, playing video games, and cosplaying. Welcome to the show, Georgia.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's an honor to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. What a great field to be in.
Oh yeah, video games. Vinny's excited.
I'm
He heard
super
video
pumped,
games and
science out, video games in.
He's gonna want some hot video game facts. So why don't you start just maybe describing what it means video game accessibility, just sort of the general issue and concern there.
Yeah, I mean, like the general thing is obviously sort of making video games accessible. Specifically, I research accessibility for individuals with disabilities, but it can be accessible to any amount of people. And so that can be sort of tackled from the software side, which video games have been super great at increasing their sort of accessibility settings for a variety of different kinds of disabilities. Or you can take that sort of from the hardware side, which is what I look at, and sort of specifically looking at video game controllers and how the interaction between the person and the video game can be made to be more accessible, or just like sort of also just different and exploring different ways to interact with video games.
Very cool.
Very cool.
And so what are some of the obstacles, say, on the hardware side?
On the hardware side, so I work with individuals with physical disabilities affecting their upper limbs. And so sort of the discussion that I've had with my participants is a lot of frustration around requirements for fine motor movement. So you can see that sort of in video games that you use sort of the keyboard and mouse. It requires a lot of fine motor movement of the fingers to press different keys. And that also applies to video game controllers, which require still a lot of fine motor movement of the fingers. And sort of in the realm of upper limb motor disabilities, that's not necessarily always accessible or super easy for everyone to do. So my research is focusing on looking at wearable technology and how that can be leveraged to create more accessible interaction for individuals with disabilities. And what has come from my research is looking actually at a lot of sort of relocating the interaction away from the hands and fingers and putting that on different parts of the bodies and including more gross motor movement instead of that fine motor movement.
Yeah, so that's my next question. What are some of the wearable techs that you're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, in the industry side, there's not a whole lot of gaming wearables on the market as of yet. The big one that we think of is, of course, virtual reality and virtual reality headsets, which have their own host of accessibility issues for a lot of people. So that's sort of a bit outside of the scope of my research, but that's like the obvious sort of wearable that exists. Other things that we've kind of talked about with participants is the Wiimote from way back in the 2000s. If you guys played Nintendo Wii, that's also kind of like wearable interaction. Yeah, so other kinds of modalities. In my research, I'm sort of currently looking at muscle movement and sort of tracking different muscle movements around the body and sort of connecting those to video game interactions. So that's kind of really what I've been looking at. Yeah.
So before we get into some of those solutions, let's talk a little bit about that field, like biomechanical engineering. Do I have that right?
Biosystems engineering. Yeah, I did
So yeah, tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, biosystems engineering is kind of a weird department of engineering that seems rather specific to the University of Manitoba. Yeah. Because I've never met anyone else who has that degree outside of University of Manitoba.
A unique offering.
Yes.
Very unique, yes. So I did my biosystems engineering degree with a biomedical specialization. So all of my capstone project, my undergrad thesis were both focused on accessibility and creating assistive technology. However, that degree can be used in other ways. Other specializations that the University of Manitoba offers is environmental, and also sort of people take it, it's a very strong agriculture lean since it is Manitoba. It's a prairie. So yeah, and I actually did do 4 months of agriculture research. So
Wow.
Oh wow.
yeah.
Diverse background.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, that's my undergrad.
So with these modified technologies, are we at the place where people could play like Mario Kart with something they're operating with their shoulders, or are we still starting at sort of more simple games to try to use these alternative movements before we get to that sort of advanced place?
Well, thankfully, actually, the Xbox Adaptive Controller, which is sort of, when people think video game accessibility, that is the thing that they think of. It's actually made my research a lot easier because it does all of the heavy lifting, translating some kind of interaction from, for example, an Arduino to your video game. So I haven't built anything yet. My research is still very theoretical, but I will be building stuff in my PhD that I'm starting in the fall.
So, sorry, can you just explain for people who don't know what that is, the Xbox Adaptive Controller? Can you
The
explain what
Xbox
that is?
Adaptive, yeah. So the Xbox Adaptive Controller kind of works as an emulator in that it's this little box that's got about 19 ports in it for a 3.5 millimeter mono jack, which is the same kind of jack that you put in a headphone jack. And then it has two USB Type A ports on it as well. And the point of this device is that you can plug in any kind of button, switch, etc., that has that 3.5 millimeter mono jack, and your computer or your Xbox will read that as video game input. So most often that is used with things like accessible switches from AbleNet, or also Logitech has released their own line of more affordable accessible switches. And so you can just plug them into that Xbox Adaptive and organize the buttons however you'd like. So that sort of does engage a little bit in that relocating from finer motor movement to gross motor movement, because you can spread those buttons out and have, your interaction be covering a lot of space, but it still doesn't sort of take that interaction away from the hands. So,
right.
But what the device is useful for is that I can make my own joystick, which I've done just as a fun little experiment using, SparkFun electronics. And you put a little code into Arduino Leonardo, and you can plug that into the Xbox Adaptive, and your computer reads that as video game interaction. So I wanted to use this as a tool for my research, and sort of, that part doing the heavy lifting between whatever kind of fun trinkets I make to interact with, and then translating that to a video game.
Mm-hmm.
So, since you're focusing on upper limb concerns, are you working at all, or is anyone working with people using their feet to control the controllers?
That actually has been come up as a suggestion, and that's part of the research of being able to relocate the interaction elsewhere upon the body. If people feel more comfortable with their feet, then they can relocate the interaction there, or their head or elsewhere on the body.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I can imagine with those adaptive controllers, you have a series of buttons and switches. There's nothing stopping you from running it down to your feet or wherever.
Yeah, exactly.
It's convenient for you.
Yeah.
This is reminding me. Deep memory coming out. I struggled with migraines as a kid, and one of my treatments was to see a hypnotist, a medically sanctioned hypnotist. Anyway, one of the things he did, aside from the hypnosis, was he attached these probes to my head. The goal was to make me more in tune with my muscles, so that I could really try to relax them forcibly. But what I would do is, with these probes attached, I would play like a video game, a very basic, crappy game where like using different muscles would cause different things to move to make me more in tune with it. Did you invent that, Georgia? I guess is my question.
No.
When you were little?
Unfortunately,
are you aware
not.
of this technology?
That makes total sense, because when you tend to gamify, especially medically related things, it makes it generally more enjoyable for people to do.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of video game accessibility research has been applying that kind of stuff to rehabilitation purposes, which is great. That gives motivations, especially for, children, gives them motivation and engagement to do physical rehab. But what is equally also important is allowing people to play their hobbies, which is very much, what I'm about.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Like, what makes a game fun? Like, I liked The Sims, which most people in their right mind would find quite boring, because it's just life, but small and boring. But for me, for some reason, it's hitting some dopamine switch. Like, as part of the video game world, like, how do you find out, like, this, they're going to love this one? Like, just by play testing it?
Yeah, my research requires a lot of user testing and a lot of user input, just based on when you're designing for people, you want those people that you're designing for to enjoy it, but also just in the sort of disability research community, there's a very important sort of understanding of like nothing about us without us. So obviously I want to have people with disabilities actively involved in my research.
That totally makes sense. And so what kind of research are you doing? Like what are some of the questions you're asking?
Yeah, so in my master's thesis, I focused on sort of exploring design guidelines and sort of formulating a sort of not instruction manual, but like different points that are important to consider in creating accessible gaming wearables. And there's been very similar research done on just general gaming wearables for, let's say, like the average quote unquote user. And so I wanted to sort of take that research that was being done that I loved, that was like super creative, all this research coming out of Finland. And I wanted to take that and sort of apply that sort of idea to individuals with disabilities and sort of understand what their needs are when we're thinking about gaming wearables. And sort of the stuff that came out of that was, as I said before, designing for more gross motor movement, designing for interaction, enjoyable interaction, but also considering not only considering like the human to the hardware interaction, but also how that hardware is going to interact with the software with the video game and sort of make it so that it's still enjoyable to play the video games that people want to play. So that was an important part.
Yeah, you don't want it to be like a tedious
exactly.
Kind of like, oh, this is so laborious.
Homework.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the point, is to still have people engage with their hobbies.
For sure.
Yeah, another sort of things that those design guidelines covered were sort of things like designing for flexibility in use and being able to, for the participant or the user to put it on the part of the body that they felt the most comfortable using. And also designing for modularity, because a very interesting thing that I found through my research was that for gamers with disabilities, you know, their experience of playing games and their sort of what feels comfortable for them is going to entirely change over the course of even just one video game playing session. So how they feel at the beginning isn't going to be how they're feeling at the end. So we need to make interaction modular so that they can, if they're playing a video game a certain way and that becomes uncomfortable for them, they can change it up. And instead of being forced to stop playing the video game before they want to, they can change their interaction type and sort of make that interaction fun and enjoyable and comfortable for them again.
I'm Tom Zalatni.
And I'm Taffer Ajamian.
And we're the hosts of the No Bad Food podcast.
No Bad Food is a show about great food and the people who love to make and eat it. Our mandate is simple: to explore, taste, and learn about food in ways that celebrate all the things that make it great.
Every week we dig into a different dish, meal, ingredient, cuisine, or piece of food media, exploring the history and culture around it, sharing favorite recipes, and learning from our wonderful guests.
The only rule?
You gotta love it.
After all, there's no such thing as bad food.
Find us in the Pod Cavern or wherever fine podcasts are sold.
So, Georgia, why do you think video game makers are sort of slow to sort of catch up to making things more accessible? What do you think are the major challenges to why it hasn't been adopted more freely?
I mean, I can say that, you know, since 2018, that's when the Xbox Adaptive was released, there's been like a lot of, I would say, not fast development in sort of gaming accessibility, but there has been development, which is good. But previous to that point, I think, this is me strictly just speculating on what I think the gaming industry is doing, but I think there was a lot of, like, the gamers with disabilities were sort of their unknown demographic. You know, they didn't, the gaming industry didn't even necessarily know that this demographic was playing video games or unhappy with the way that they were playing video games. So there's that aspect to it, as well as the gaming is a very interesting hobby because it started sort of like in, you know, the 70s with arcade games and stuff. And as those people who started playing video games when they first started, they're getting older now. You're having this aging demographic, and people don't want to give up their hobbies. So, you know, someone who started playing video games in the 70s and now is getting older, they don't want to stop playing video games. They want to continue. So we have this concept where now there's more and more people who, through, you know, sort of aging, are probably experiencing more and more disabilities, and they still want to play video games. So the video game industry needs to adopt to their new sort of demographic that they found through that.
It makes perfect sense to me. And like, I guess this kind of research just must have like so many other applications, not just for gaming, because you can totally see just any kind of accessibility, any input interface that's going to benefit from this can be applied in so many other ways, because ultimately you're just interacting with the computer, which is so much of our interaction in data life as it is.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, people use use computers tons now post-COVID environment.
Yeah, and I imagine you could see your design guidelines being applied outside the field of video games, although I imagine it's more specific to gaming.
Mine are a little bit specific to gaming, but you know, if some other junior researcher wants to take my thesis once it's done and do their own thing based on that and apply it to other areas, I think that would be very cool.
When it comes to this type of tech, would you say video games are at the forefront, or is there some area of life you can think of that's doing something similar, that's sort of leading the way that everyone else is sort of copying after?
That's a good question, actually. I've been such in a tunnel vision of video games for a long time now that I haven't really looked outside of that, but
yeah, I mean, I immediately like
Cars.
Cars is going to be one of like because it's all such like a abstracted interface with like a steering wheel, and who knows where those are going to go in the
We're just
future.
automating that entirely, though.
Yeah, I guess we don't even need drivers in the future anyways.
So I'm really hung up on this idea of how do you know when someone liked a game? Is it with your research, Georgia? Did you mostly just ask them like that was 10 out of 10 fun, or do you have like vials? You're taking blood samples and you're measuring like hormones and endorphins. Like how do you know when someone likes something?
Unfortunately, REB will not let me take any kind of readings on people like that. I think
You come at them with a needle at the end of the game. Wait, what?
Yeah, sometimes they don't even like it when HCI researchers like just put a tech on a participant. They don't even like that sometimes. Yeah, so I mean, again, mostly my research right now has been not yet on the prototyping end, but more so just like on the participant input end. And it's a lot of, kind of just asking the participant their opinion and asking like really probing them about like what specifically about this kind of interaction that you had experienced did you like or dislike? And that's sort of how I've been getting most of my feedback from them.
Sure.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, which is that a lot of information was coming out of Finland.
I've been looking,
That was really specific, and I want to know more about that.
Yeah.
Why Finland? What are they doing over there?
They're bored.
I don't know. I think the Nordic countries are just really cool. First of all, and I don't know, one day when I was, early on in my master's doing my literature review and trying to decide what direction I wanted to go for my thesis, I found this very interesting paper by a very interesting man and his team in Finland. His last name is Baruch. I cannot pronounce his first name because it is a very Finnish first name.
Sure.
But he had a very cool paper, a couple papers about creating sort of very fun and creative ideas for video game wearables. And I was like, that got me thinking, I'm like, he's right. There hasn't really been a whole lot of wearable innovation in video games. There was for a moment when we had things like the Wiimote and also Nintendo, again, with their Nintendo Labo thing that they had. That was like,
the cardboard
one moment of like real cool, weird interaction and then just gone. But yeah,
no one liked them. Not enough people bought them because I remember
it was an experiment.
It was very
and
experimental.
Some people got
So it was just commenting on stuff like that, and then his research kind of proposed these ideas like, what if we put like a wig and you interacted with the wig and that was video game interaction, and it's very cool. And also in his research he specifically included cosplayers, which is part of how I found it, as just kind of looking if there's anything related to cosplay in HCI research. There is and just kind of was interesting, there's different ideas that came out of that research. But then me coming from sort of an accessibility background, I was like, this is very cool, but I can see already some accessibility issues. So,
Very cool. Finland, metal and video game accessibility.
Yeah, who knew?
And so then what was your pathway into all of this? Like, where did the seed for all of this start? Did you come in from video games or cosplay initially, or just engineering?
It's interesting, mostly from an engineering perspective first. I took in my, I believe, third year of engineering, I took a design of assistive technology course, which was one of my design electives. And I loved that course so much. I thought it was so much fun and so cool. And I learned what I thought was really valuable information for me. So I took that and was really inspired by that. And that's kind of what set me on the sort of accessibility pathway. And then for my capstone project in my undergrad degree, I worked with the Health Sciences Center Assistive Technology Products and Services in Winnipeg to build a prototype for a power wheel joystick mount. So just the mounting system for the joystick that would sort of rotate so that a user of the wheelchair could have the joystick be closer to them. And so that was super fun. It gave me a lot of introduction to specifically designing UI interfaces for individuals with disabilities. And then finally in my undergrad thesis, I wanted to, instead of just choosing a professor to work with and working on one of their existing projects, I wanted to create my own project to work on. So I ended up researching video game accessibility and specifically looking at different sort of universal design principles that are not included in video game controller design. And yeah, from that point on, I just wanted to really pursue this fully. And the Creative Interactions Lab here at Carleton University is super awesome for researching accessibility. And I just thought that was a perfect fit for me. And thankfully I was accepted into the program, and yeah.
Very cool. Wow. So Georgia, I'm a biologist. Engineering is very far from anything I've ever thought of doing. What is designing a prototype as an engineer even like? Like you have this drawing and you're like, this is gonna work, and then you like start building things and you're soldering. Like what are sort of the gross steps of building a prototype?
The gross steps, firstly, is a lot of user research. At least that's the first step that I like to take. In my undergrad capstone project, I started with interviewing a couple of power wheelchair users just to understand like what exactly is the barrier that you're experiencing and what do you want to see as the future. So it's a lot of user research first, and then low fidelity prototyping. So things like using cardboard and paper and stuff to just sort of figure out your ideas first. And then after that point, some like minor testing, and then you go to the mid-fidelity prototype phase, which is still a little rough looking, but a little bit cleaner, and it like actually is like working, so to speak. So, but
wow,
yes, to answer
cool.
it is a lot of soldering and little electronics and Arduinos and everything, and 3D printing now.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
3D printing.
Because now you can like customize, and oh man.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Where's the fun in that? It's the artists with the cardboard and the glue. That's where
you just want to craft.
Well, yes. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Engineering is pretty crafty, but the crafting materials are like wires.
It should have been sold. It was sold to me like that is basically knitting. I would have been in like
I was going to say knitting is engineering to me.
Wow.
It is.
I agree.
Thank you.
So Georgia, you obviously like video games. So what's sort of your background before you went into undergrad? Like, were you a really sciencey kid? Were you building things with yarn and glue?
You playing video games all night?
I actually, as a child, did not play that much video games. My parents were kind of not an anti-video game household, but they were not
pro.
They weren't going out buying me video games or anything. So the first video game console that I bought with my own money was a Nintendo Wii.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, and I loved it. Played Mario Kart like every day pretty much. Yeah, and then as I kind of got older, I discovered Steam and PC gaming and everything. Yeah, I'm still more of like I would say a casual gamer. I like playing things. I also like The Sims.
Nice.
Yes,
the real games.
The gamers. Yeah,
technically defined as a toy, but that's okay.
We'll here we go. She's the professional.
All right, I defer.
Okay,
I defer.
Georgia has the final word on what is and is not a video game.
Sims are great.
And were you really into science as well, or did that sort of come later?
I was pretty into science, in school, but I consider myself rather artistic as well, and that's sort of where the cosplay side comes in a little bit. Like I took up crocheting when I was quite young, and I used to, in my undergrad days, I used to make little crochet dolls. I actually have one here. It's a little, I don't know if you can see him. It's a little raccoon.
That's amazing.
I used to make things like that and then sell them at like the local Comic-Con.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
So I have an artistic side, and I think that's definitely kind of what attracted me to engineering a little bit, because it is more arts and crafts than I think most people think it is.
It is, yeah, for sure. It's like it really does demand a lot of creativity, and instead of like yarn or cardboard, you're working with like real practical, usable elements, like for depending on the application. So in this case, it's wires and buttons and whatnot. Yeah,
I would argue the sciences in general require. To be good at it, you need a lot of creativity. It's a lot of you get into it's constant problem solving. Absolutely. And what better way to solve problems than to be armed with creative solutions? And having these sorts of hobbies, I think, definitely is a benefit. It's a message I constantly have to tell my students, because I think they get led down this road of, if I want to be a successful student scientist, I need to delete every other part of my life and focus on academics. And they forget that these other things aren't just a pastime. They are useful for your formative learning.
It's so holistic. Like everything that you learn and do from other fields is going to be applicable in some way. If at least it gives you, at the baseline, it gives you context, it gives you an understanding for the world around you. And how could that not be applicable when you're dealing with the world around you, whether it's a scientific or not application?
And I mean, I'm building on that. I noticed a lot when I was in engineering that there was a lot of, I think is mostly joking, but still like slightly hurtful, a very like anti-art kind of vibe from the students. And, you know, me as someone who was both into sciences as well as art was kind of like, I know y'all engineers here, but like if you build an ugly bridge, no one's gonna want to use it. You need a little bit of art.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive.
No, I think the great things that are around us have an aesthetic value to them, and there is something to be said about crafting something beautiful and simple, and it gives you a sense of elegance, which I think is highly applicable in the sciences.
Yeah. So Georgia, you've hinted at a PhD. Are you finished your master's?
I submitted my so close. I submitted my thesis to my committee on the 17th, and I defend on the 31st.
Oh my goodness.
In a week? Oh my God.
Wow.
What are you going to do when we show up at your defense? We're like, Georgia.
I'll be very happy.
That's so exciting. Congratulations.
Yeah, just handing the paper in. Oh my goodness. What a relief.
The biggest weight off my back. I felt like I could not entirely like relax though, because I was doing quantitative research methods course sort of for my PhD. Yeah. I'm a qual girl, so doing quantitative research was like stressful. But yeah, I had like that project due like a couple days later.
Oh my
actually
goodness.
Yesterday, so now I can finally relax a little bit.
Wow, so you've already started on the PhD. Is this also at Carleton? Why don't you tell us a bit about your next chapter?
It's still at Carleton, still at the same lab, at the Creative Interactions lab at Carleton. So I have for my master's degree, I have started with my supervisor, Dr. Audrey Girard, and sort of then her postdoc, but now professor at Waterloo. Dr. Karen Cochran is my co-supervisor for both my master's and then also for my PhD. And she's great. Karen and I are like friends, which I love.
Good to have a good, you need that good relationship, eh?
Exactly, yeah.
And what are you hoping to research? Or are you still, it's too early to say?
I'm still sort of going on with the same area of video game accessibility, but I'm also sprinkling in a little bit of like methodological research and sort of exploring dialogic / performance analysis and its applications in HCI research, because which is a method of narrative inquiry, which is used in HCI research, but is only used with certain different kinds of analysis methods. And I want to introduce a sort of newer, it's not new to methods, but it's new to HCI. Yeah, so a little bit of theory thrown in there. And also I was talking to Karen this morning, and maybe sort of the idea of exploring sort of DIY communities within like the disability community, and figuring out ways to support people DIYing their own like video game interaction solutions.
Oh, so cool.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can get like crowdsourcing on problems, it's amazing what comes up.
Yeah, and like organizations like Makers Making Change already have such like huge input, so stuff like that, but like allowing the user to sort of be able to DIY their own solutions a little bit, I think would be really fun. And I love DIY, so I'm super excited to look into that.
And just to kind of leapfrog that as we wrap things up, you've also mentioned cosplaying, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. That is my hobby that keeps me sane. Like we were saying, this sort of, I do a lot of like science all day. And then I also need a little bit of like art and something creative just to engage the other side of the brain a little bit. So I started cosplaying when I was in high school in 2013, and just kind of stuck with it as something that I like to do. I like video games and I like comic books, and being able to dress up like those characters, I think is super fun. So
So
I make
cool.
all my cosplays. I find it very relaxing to be sewing them all the time. So
Yeah, what are some characters, if you're willing to sort of share that?
sure.
Oh, this is too private in your private life.
Yeah. My favorite character right now is probably Harley Quinn.
Oh,
She's one of
okay.
my favorite. She's
I've
a
heard of that one.
scientist, so I love her.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I love cosplaying as Harley Quinn. I have a couple of different cosplays of her. I'm currently working on a jury cosplay from Street Fighter 6.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Amazing.
So yeah, I try to do like a variety of stuff as well as like not characters per se, but my own like original designs of characters or just like concepts that I like to do. So I did like a Rococo themed outfit
Very cool.
in during COVID times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And would you...
COVID gave me a lot of time to work
I was
on a
gonna
cosplay,
say, yeah,
I'm
that's
gonna
a
say.
good hobby to have during
A
COVID.
lot of hobbies got cemented during the dark ages there.
Oh yeah.
Do you go to like Comic Cons? Like for me, when I think of, I don't know much about cosplay, but to me it's like putting on costumes from usually video game or that sort of world and going to a convention. But I guess you don't need to go to the convention for it to be cosplay, do you?
No, actually, that's most of it. I do go to comic conventions and anime conventions and wear my little cosplays there. But I also run a Discord server for local Ottawa and Gatineau area cosplayers and cosplay photographers. And so that's mostly just trying to engage the community and like talking to each other and like sharing ideas and sharing tips. And we sometimes have Discord meetups where we all dress up in our little
Very
costumes and meet somewhere and then take little photos of each other and stuff. So that's the other kind of main outlet that I have with cosplay.
Very cool. And is there like a public facing aspect to this of what you do? Like a social media account where you're like, these are my cosplays? Sometimes people do that.
Yeah, I do have a social media. I'm mostly active on Instagram at the ghost, GEE_the ghost. So that's my Instagram handle if anyone wants to take a look.
Very cool.
Very cool. Good for you having all these hobbies. See, it's possible, people.
Yeah, you got to do both. You can't just be locked in the lab.
If I didn't have hobbies, I'd go insane.
Yeah,
so.
I think most people do.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
Yes, the
If
rest
you
will
don't,
just go nuts.
yeah, just go bananas.
Go bananas. And final question, Georgia, where do you see yourself in like 10 years? You're going to do this PhD. Hopefully that's done within those 10
It's a big
years.
question.
You never know.
You don't have to commit.
But do you think you want to be a researcher? Like, do you have any sort of picture for where you're going to go?
That's a really hard question. The answer is like, I don't know, mostly because I have so many I like a lot of different things. Like
Sure.
I had a lot of, got a lot of experience through TAing, a couple undergrad courses. And I was like, man, I really like teaching and I really like interacting with students. Maybe I want to go be a professor. But then I also like, want to actively be working for accessibility rights. And I was like, maybe I want to be like a lobbyist or something like that, So I could see myself going in a couple different directions. I don't really know yet.
Yeah.
And that's
the
okay.
answer.
Yeah, and it's okay.
You have a whole PhD in
one
a week
step at a time.
to think about it. Well, thank you so much, Georgia, for
Thank you,
taking time to
Georgia.
chat with us. Your research sounds super cool. You're making the world a better place.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking time to chat.
Thank you guys so much for inviting me. This is great.
Awesome.
Thank you,
See
Georgia.
you. Good luck on your defense.
Yeah, go Georgia.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
It's so cool. It's an amazing field.
It's nice to hear that that's where things are going. That companies are starting to see that they can't just ignore this whole part of the population anymore, that there's, they need to start advancing and making these accessible for everyone.
I mean, it's also good business. I mean, you just sell more copies of your game. It's all, it's always some calculation of like, if we spend this much money, are we going to make that much money back? But I think it's really important to like make these things accessible for the population at large. Like there's so many people. Well, games should be for everyone or as many people as possible. And I think it's awesome that there are people, expanding the reach and the scope of what can be done with them.
Now we just need a controller that makes me decent at Mario Kart.
Good luck.
They haven't invented that yet.
I don't.
But you know what? I demand it.
I think that'll be a big ask. But you know what? Maybe it's out there.
Well, that's it for our show,
That's
Vinny.
it
We
for
learned
today.
a lot
We
about the Voyager.
And bioluminescence.
Hey, nice. And of course, wearable tech, thanks
Yep.
to Georgia.
Amazing.
Why don't you send people off on our socials, Vin?
If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our YouTube channel, all at LRG pod.
You're completely abandoning the Bird app?
No, the Bird app is dead to me. On YouTube, you can just look up Learn Real Good Podcast. We have our science facts on there now as little shorts. But yeah, LRG Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. If you're a STEM student out there in grad school and would love to be a guest on us, we'd love to have you as a guest. Send us an email at learnrealgoodpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, you can't sound like Dracula.
He's nice.
Oh, don't spook them out. Don't spook them out, Vinny.
Come to learnrealgoodpodcast@gmail.com.
Thank you for the PBS voice. Well, thank you, Vinny.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, listeners.
Thank you so much. Like, subscribe, tell your friends about this podcast if you listen to it.
That would be fantastic.
We live on word of mouth.
Absolutely.
So that's it.
Yeah. See you next time.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.